Why is global trade growing in importance? This is from Chapter 15, Section 2. Can be found on pages 298 to 301 in our book. We have seen in our world a major increase in trade since World War II. Global trade has increased significantly since the end of World War II, and there are a variety of reasons. One of them has to do with transportation, and then that there has been major increases or improvements in transportation. Today, we use much larger ships on the ocean, and the ports that accommodate these larger ships have been built in a lot more countries. These ports can unload these really, really large ships very, very quickly. In addition, we have larger cargo planes that can even transport perishable goods like food thousands of miles very, very quickly. Adding to the benefits of these improvements in transportation have been major improvements in communication. Satellite systems and telephone lines allow us to talk instantly with people around the world. And customers can be served by employees in another country almost as easily as in the same country. Heck, people can even get online customer support today. All of this helps increase trade. We've also seen a change in the types of goods that are traded. It used to be that the major goods traded on a global scale, on a global market, were bulk commodities, things like grain and coal, and what we see here, steel pipes. And these things are heavy and they're hard to ship. Today, we see a lot more finished goods or manufactured goods being traded, and that means more value per pound. So if we measure the amount of trade in terms of a dollar amount, this has led to an increase in trade as well. We might want to ask, why do countries trade? Well, countries trade for the same reason that people trade, and that is to get goods and services that they value at a lower cost. We talked about it for individuals, and the same is true for countries. Even if a country can make everything they need, there are major benefits to specializing and trading for everything else. And it goes back to what we learned about earlier in the year, absolute advantage and comparative advantage. Absolute advantage, remember, means that you are just more efficient. You can make more of something with the same amount of resources than somebody else. But what's more important for trade is comparative advantage. And a person has a comparative advantage over somebody else if they have a lower opportunity cost. A country has a comparative advantage if they have a lower opportunity cost. In other words, they give up less to produce the same amount. For example, in the United States, we buy a lot of our lumber, a lot of our timber from Canada. Canada, on the other hand, buys a lot of their airplanes from the United States. Now, both countries are quite capable of producing both of those goods, but the United States has a lower opportunity cost for producing airplanes because of our workforce, because of our technology, et cetera, et cetera. Canada has a lower opportunity cost for producing timber, mainly because they have a lot more of the resources needed to do so. So we trade for timber from Canada. Canada trades for airplanes from us. Well, why do different countries have comparative advantages? Well, the first reason might be climate. When you think of agricultural products, crops, things that are grown, this is often the cause of a comparative advantage, the climate. Think of tropical countries. They obviously have a comparative advantage in producing tropical fruits like coffee and bananas. We could grow those things here in Ohio, but it would require a greenhouse. It would require a lot more money and resources, and therefore it's better for us to let them grow those things in tropical countries and then trade for them when we need them. Here in Ohio, we have a comparative advantage for growing things like wheat and corn, and that's due in large part to our climate and geography. Climate can also give a country a comparative advantage at different times of the year. If you go to a grocery store during late fall, winter, or even early spring and buy fruits and vegetables, there's a good chance that some of those fruits and vegetables, fresh fruits and vegetables, were grown in South America, were grown somewhere in the southern hemisphere. And the reason is when it's winter up here, it's summer down there. In other words, when all our trees are barren and don't have any fruit, the trees down there are ripe and ready to be picked. So the climate and the geographical location of a country could give it a comparative advantage in certain times of the year. Another reason for comparative advantages between countries might be differences in the factors of production. And we talked about these earlier in the year. It could be capital goods like factories, machines, tools. It could be labor. It could be land resources. If a country has more of any of these things, they may have a comparative advantage in producing a certain type of good or service. Let's think about China, for example. China has a lot of low-cost manual labor. They have lots of people who are willing and able to work for lower wages than, say, American workers. And as a result, China has a comparative advantage in producing a lot of things that require manual labor. It's why so many products that we buy say made in China. Earlier, we talked about Canada having a lot of trees. That is a land resource. Canada has a lot of trees, and therefore Canada has a comparative advantage in producing lumber. Another reason a country might have a comparative advantage is they may be the first to develop a particular type of technology. Here we see robots constructing automobiles in a factory. Japan was the first country to develop robots like this. And for a while, Japan had a major comparative advantage in producing inexpensive automobiles because they were using robots before anybody else. Now today they don't have as big an advantage because other countries have started to use the same technology, but a country can gain a comparative advantage through advancements in technology. The United States has a comparative advantage in two really important industries to our economy. Software production. A lot of the world's software is written and developed here in the United States because we have a comparative advantage in technology. We have more computers, we have access to computers, and we have other things that give us a comparative advantage in developing software. That comparative advantage in technology also gives us an advantage in producing pharmaceuticals, drugs, and medication, a lot of which are developed and produced here in the United States because the U.S. has a comparative advantage in that area. We have the laboratories, we have the lab equipment, we have the computers, we have the scientists, so there's a little bit of labor in there as well. But it gives us a comparative advantage in producing pharmaceuticals. Comparative advantage isn't the only reason countries trade. Countries also trade for some other reasons. The first one is differentiated products. That means you're essentially getting the same product, but maybe you trade because you want a different style. You want something made with different materials. You want something that fits a slightly different taste. These Italian leather shoes go on your feet. They protect your feet when you're walking. They make sure you don't slip, just the same as a lot of other shoes. But they look very different. They have a different style. They're made out of a different material. So some people might choose to trade for those, not because they can't get them from other sources, but because they want differentiated products. Another example can be found in movies and television. We produce cartoons here in the United States. Other people prefer cartoons produced in other parts of the world. The same could be said for music. American music is a major export for our economy. And that's because people in other parts of the world, they have their own music, but they prefer American pop music. Clothing and some food products like cheese and wine are other good examples of people trading for differentiated products.